This is the Izzy Lala Podcast. I'm Izzy Lala, and I'm a poet, a visual artist, and a recently self-published author from Sacramento, California. Art and culture have always been an integral part of my life and of my being, and have honestly made me the person that I am today. So in this podcast, I explore the various elements within culture, especially those of urban culture, the parts that have influenced me and I hope will positively impact you.
White light sheds on an unkept bed. Black dot seeps and creeps into her
Poetry. The art form I have grown to know and love has been in me since childhood. In a room with little to no furniture, I sat on a bed, hunched over a notepad, writing what my young mind would conceive as a poem. It was a few short lines that held my most honest emotions. It was the only way I knew how to express what I was feeling at the time. The woes of adolescence, of being raised with little means of entertainment, of being raised with little means, period. I didn't let that stop me from being creative, though, and instead used it to develop this love for the only thing that I knew I always had access to: my mind, a pen, and a piece of paper. We had no money, but the house was always full with kids running through those halls of thin walls. You could hear laughing on the other side, and the growling stomach would subside. This is the Izzy Lala Podcast. I remember at a very young age reading Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. I remember that touching a part of me in just a few short lines. It penetrated something in me that maybe in my life there was a wider road, but for me, I was supposed to choose a road less traveled. It not only said that, but it allowed me to see it too, to put me there on that narrow road where I often felt I was anyway, a kid pursuing education when no one in my family or extended family was. I was seeing many things as a kid, some things I shouldn't have seen, all the things that come from living in a grittier part of a lower income community. But when I read poetry, it somehow allowed me to relate to the poet whom I had never met, yet had been able to eloquently state what I was facing at the time. It allowed me to see myself in the words. Two roads. The one where I was raised, where many of my family members had dropped out of school or who had been caught up in what that environment affords them, or the path less traveled, where maybe, just maybe, I could cross the barriers that kept us from a world outside of what we were living in. Luckily enough for me, I was able to cross one barrier, which was entering high school. In high school, I developed a love for none other than the poet Langston Hughes. He spoke on things I was familiar with and interested in. He opened my mind to injustices of people of color while also somehow breathing hope into his poetry. At least that's how I interpreted it. And this poetry bred a certain love for communities like the one I was raised in, inspired me to embracing where I had come from and seeing it as character being built rather than what it was tearing down. I gathered the words from the poet that somehow opened my eyes to the beauty that was in my community, despite all its flaws. That's one of the ways poetry has benefited me. It has opened my mind to seeing things I wasn't able to see on my own. It articulated what I could not and helped me to see life in a way that at the time I could not on my own. Poetry can help you see life in a different way. It can help you not feel isolated in your world. But more than that, it can help you to embrace where you've come from and who you are. Poetry has been a vehicle to embracing myself and where I've come from and my struggle too. Let poetry live. Let it remind you of where you've come from and embrace those things that make you you. Don't forget about the ones in the community that has helped shape you, and let's allow poetry to continue to be the breath that allows us to embrace who we are and where we've come from. How has poetry helped you to embrace yourself and where you're from? We had no money, but the house was always full with kids running through those halls of thin walls. You could hear laughing on the other side, and the growling stomach would subside. We had no money, and welfare was funny because we all waited for the first to come. after splurging throughout the month on food that never lasted to the end. We always knew when the month would begin again, though, because tacos were on the table and my mom's mind a little more stable. And we laughed a little harder. My mom always said we may not have much, but at least we have love. And embarrassed as I was of a home with no furniture and a fridge with no food, I still laughed with my brother and sister and ran with them through the dark halls of borderline poverty and giggled in the face of emptiness and disgrace, for we had more than that empty fridge. My mom said to begin with, an empty heart is worse than an empty stomach, for at least an empty stomach can fill up on a few tacos. But what of an empty heart? No family to fill that empty house, no parents to feed those empty mouths, no laughter on the other side. We had no money, but see, our hearts were always full, and food was secondary to our soul, for laughter feeds the soul. Can't you hear that laughter call? For poverty is a choice in us all. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Izzy Lala Podcast, and I hope you continue to listen for more art, culture, and people that continue to breathe life into it. All music and poetry on this podcast is produced by Izzy Lala.